Before we get started, I wanted to share this workshop with everyone. So if you haven't yet, down below are my 2 free gifts for you. One of them is the Getting Started for Police Officers. It's going to walk you through the hiring process. And there's a test. There's a written exam in there that's based on the civil service exam. Take it, see how you score, see how you stack up, and then understand that there's ways to improve from there. But take it, let's see how you do on the test. Also, my free coaching call. If you have something specific to your hiring process, I'm here and I'm willing to help. The link is down below in the description, and you can jump on and get both of those free gifts. As I said, they're from me to you. I hope you enjoy. I hope you use them, and I hope I help you get to your dream and goal of becoming a police officer. All right, here we go. This is going to be our 2-day police candidate workshop, and I'm excited to jump in, get started with you. Listen, we're going to be covering the changes in the police process or the police hiring process and what that means for you. Today, we're going to go over what we're really looking at changing. I have a list of things I want to cover over here. So if you see me glance over, don't mind it. These are the highlights and bullet points that I really want to make sure we hit. And then tomorrow, or day 2, we are going to cover what it means for you specifically. What are the hurdles that you're going to have to jump through, or what are the hurdles that may apply directly to you? So let's jump right in and get started. All right, the changes in the police hiring process. Let's get the elephant out of the room. First thing is the defund the police movement has changed a lot of dynamics when it comes to law enforcement officers and the application process and who they're bringing in. So while many are out there saying, hey, I'm excited about becoming a law enforcement officer, so there's not as many applicants, I have a better shot at becoming a law enforcement officer, that is true to some degree. But from the other aspect, law enforcement departments and agencies aren't going to put themselves into this type of position ever again, where they're short 20, 30, 40% staffing when it comes to their commissioned or sworn officers. It is unrealistic to believe that they would want to make that same mistake all over again and get candidates that are either going to leave, they're going to jump in and not be fully prepared for the profession and say, hey, this isn't for me, I'm going to go pursue another career. Or they're going to have individuals that say, hey, get in with us, and then lateral out to another department, say for money or for prestige or whatever that reason is. Now, there's nothing wrong with lateraling out to another department. But at the same point, departments are trying to change that process to where when you come in, they want to keep you. They want that retention. They're going to work hard to do it. Now, that could be with pay raises. And as I've said before, pay raises have went through the roof for law enforcement officers. It's not uncommon to start off at a 55, 60, 65,000 salary, or even 70, 75,000, depending on where you are in the nation for locality pay. There's a lot of locality pay bumps that get added to your base salary, depending if you're local, state, or federal. So keep all this in mind. Now, the defund the police movement, yeah, it did make an impact and it did change a few things, but ultimately, certain things that law enforcement decided to change was the quality of officers they wanted to bring on. So while, yes, less individuals may be applying, that doesn't mean that the quality of individuals has went down. If anything, they are trying to get an even higher quality of individuals that can go through. And we're going to discuss that here in a little bit about what exactly they're putting emphasis on now, rather than the actual old technique, right? The old technique was very linear. It was apply, written exam, pass the written exam, physical exam, pass the physical exam, board interview, and then from there you go to maybe you get moved on. If you get fingerprinted after the board interview, that they wanted to hire you, or at least move you along in the candidate pool. Or board interview, then conditional offer. You start your background investigation. After you accept your conditional officer, once you start your background investigation, while that's going on, you're also doing your polygraph, your medical screening, your psych screening. and maybe one more interview if you have an interview with the chief, and then they wrap up your poly at the end, or not your poly, excuse me, your background at the end, and say, hey, your background's cleared, and they give you an official offer or your permanent offer. And then you get your academy date if you haven't had an academy. And that was a very linear process. However, with everything going on, departments are mixing it up all over the place. Not one department is the same. Some departments are moving the order around. Other departments are getting rid of certain things, and some of them are even getting rid of certain things temporarily, which is just so that they can get officers in, not to weaken the process, but to just shorten the process so that they can get individuals in. But they're putting, if they take a process out, they're putting more emphasis on the other parts of the process. And we'll get into that a little bit more too. Before we get into the processes that they're taking away and how they're retaining individuals, we really need to discuss their recruiting tactics. And their recruiting tactics are following a lot of military standards, right? So if you take the Navy SEALs have started recruiting from high school teams, right? Because Navy SEALs put a lot of emphasis on teamwork. So they've started recruiting from high school sports that really emphasize teams. They've started recruiting athletes, instead of getting recruited to play in the NFL, you're getting recruited to go through BUDS, basic underwater demolition / SEALs training. That's the way the military and special operation units have decided to do it. Law enforcement has started doing the same thing as well. They have decided to take the idea of reaching out. Now, high school is a little low because there's age requirements usually when you're coming out of high school. At least for the US, there's age requirements. Canada, the age requirement is 18 for certain law enforcement positions. And other places in the world, it's more 18, but US, it's 21. So individuals coming out of high school don't qualify yet because of the age restriction of 21. The other aspect of it is the fact that when they go after these individuals, they are still looking for a certain group, a certain personality, not necessarily demographic, but personality. They're looking for sports players, individuals that can pass the physical aspect, but they're also looking for individuals who are academically superior. Now, once again, recruiting out of high school is the low side. You're not seeing too much of that right now, although it is growing. The other aspect is they're recruiting strongly out of college, right? Individuals that are wrapping up a 4-year degree preferred, not because it's a requirement, but because they're, one, closer to the age requirement, and two, they've showed an ability to commit to something for an extended period of time. Committing to college for 4 years when you're paying for it or you're taking out loans and then still maintaining a good GPA is a good way to demonstrate to law enforcement individuals that, hey, I am committed to completing what I started. If you have a background in criminal justice or criminology, if that's what you're majoring in, of course you're going to stand out, and of course they're going to be reaching out to those individuals. But as I said, they're mixing it up. They're also looking at psychology as a big one right now. They're trying to recruit from psychology majors. They're trying to recruit from humanities majors. Individuals that have that emotional intelligence and the ability to connect with individuals to possibly mitigate the ability for a conflict out on the streets or out on patrol. And the psychology majors and humanity majors are really being sought after for that particular aspect. While there is a large amount of psychology that is tied into the criminal justice and the criminology majors, if you're really focused on just psychology as your major in general, law enforcement is transitioning to individuals being able to de-escalate a situation and not rely on a defensive tool if possible. So if you can stand out that way and you can articulate that yourself that way, that, hey, I am very good at de-escalating an intense situation. I'm very good at understanding individuals and connecting with individuals. Those are highly sought after traits, not only in the patrol sector, but as you advance through law enforcement, say in the investigations or detective realm or criminal investigator realm, very, very sought after talents and skills. The trick, and you're going to hear me say this throughout these next 2 days, is learning how to articulate it and get out of your own way and not hinder yourself when it comes to explaining your experience, even if that's just college, which college would just be training, right? You might not be able to say I have firsthand experience if you're just relying on your educational center, but you can say, hey, I've had training and education in dealing with conflict and dealing with conflict resolution. So, and during an intense situation, if you could verbally articulate that and it's the truth, don't pat your resume, because that will come up during the board interview and they will be asking you questions based on your resume. And if you can't articulate a particular incident where you've utilized these techniques, but you claimed that you're proficient at utilizing them and you have utilized them in the field, it's going to hurt you during a board interview. So think about this, that before it was law enforcement was looking for an individual that could pass a written exam, had a base level of about 10th grade education. That's what the written exam pretty much hit on. 10th grade level of education for the written part, the grammar part, and the reading. Those are usually the three main core, and math. I apologize. So 10th grade level. And then a lot of emphasis was put how well they do on their physical test. I'm going to be honest with you. Those aspects still matter greatly. They're not, and it's a good way to move yourself to the top of the candidate list. If you are a candidate, doing really well on your written and physical exam is the easiest way to, and the quickest way to make yourself stand out as a top candidate in the hiring process. And I've said this before on a lot of other trainings, just because they have 40 vacancies or 100 vacancies or 500 vacancies, it doesn't mean that they're hiring that many individuals, because they can only hire enough officers that can fill a academy. And if they don't have an individual academy and they have a shared academy, you're going to run into that issue where if it's a shared academy, maybe they only have 4 billets during this hiring cycle. They're not going to keep you on the payroll for 4 months for free when you can't go out and patrol. And then they're just going to have, so it's 4 months on the payroll before your academy opens up, and then it's another 6 months through your academy. No, they're just going to do another hiring sequence, or maybe they'll have candidate pools and they'll get you started in the process and then say, hey, we're going to contact you for a background when a position opens up. But you could be waiting 4 months, or you could be waiting a year or 2. So as I've said before, all this stuff applies, and I wish I could cover everything over these next 2 days, and obviously I can't. But I'm going to try and briefly cover the little bit of what is changing and where you should start focusing your time, such as, training in psychology and de-escalation and conflict resolution. Those are some really big ticket items that may be able to boost your resume to get you to stand out a little bit. But ultimately, it's still going to come down to how well you do on the specific hiring process, the written test, the physical test, the board interview, and then obviously the background, poly, psychological, and medical exams are all just ways for you to get removed, right? It's not, hey, I need to score well on my background. No, it's, hey, I need to pass it or I fail it and I get removed. Hey, I need to score well on my medical. No, I need to pass it or fail it or get removed. Same with psychology, your psychological exam, and same with your polygraph. There we go. Couldn't think of it for a second. So when you're trying to understand these changes, understand it's switching more from is the individual going to pass the polygraph? Because some departments out there are removing the polygraph, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, but some departments are removing the polygraph just due to the fact that they're leaving good candidates on the table, all because they have a polygraph examiner who maybe isn't the most highly trained, or individuals are just naturally nervous during a polygraph. So some departments are removing that, but just because they're removing it does not mean that it's getting easier. Honestly, a lot of departments, because of the state of affairs that law enforcement is in right now, are putting more emphasis on the psychological screening. And I've been seeing almost triple or quadruple the amount of individuals being disqualified because they're failing their psychological exam. And depending on which tests they take, whether they do the CPI or the MMPI 1 or 2 or a combination thereof or an individual one, they usually outsource and they usually bring in a third-party company to handle the psychological screenings, which means you have to do a 500 to 1200 question exam. And then afterwards, you have to sit down with a psychologist and explain to them any particular information they want to know. Maybe something popped on your exam or a flag hit for one of your questions or multiple questions, and you're going to have to explain that. Well, now these departments are telling the examiner, if you catch a glimpse of anything, we want you to articulate it, write it down, and then we'll review your report and we'll determine whether or not they pass or that this individual is suited for a law enforcement career. So the doctor, right, the psychologist is saying, hey, I'm reviewing this. I like where this candidate is going with this answer because it popped a flag on the question. So, one of the ones I always pop a flag on, and I've said this before, is how many guns do you own? A, 0, B, 1 to 3, or 1 to 2, C, 3 to 4, and then D, greater than 4. And I have to circle greater than 4. And it's something that pops, and I'm constantly dealing with psychologists asking me, why do you own so many firearms? And I have to clearly articulate that I'm a firearms instructor for law enforcement, and I need to be proficient with different models and different manufacturers of firearms. Therefore, I own different models and manufacturers of firearms. That's a reasonable explanation. A non-reasonable explanation would just say, I really like guns. I always wanted to carry a gun on me for my job. You're going to get disqualified immediately. They're going to write that up, and they're going to say, and ultimately it's not their decision, but they're going to say, I do not recommend this individual carry a firearm as their profession, right? Or this individual has the authority to carry a firearm, with a badge, however they articulate it. If I were to say that, then there's nothing else that would happen. It's going to be on there. Anyone that wants to pull it up, any department I apply to can always get access to that psychological report from the original department, and it's always going to be on there. So if I have that type of question and I understand that there's a reasonableness that comes with certain questions that get flagged, I need to take into consideration my answer. And my answer is hey, I'm a law enforcement instructor. I'm a firearms instructor for law enforcement. And I need to be proficient at showing law enforcement how to deal with different platforms of firearms that they may come across, right? That's a reasonable answer right there. If it comes down to the other side of it, where it's more social, right? A more social question where it's say, hey, do you enjoy going out and meeting people? And you say, no, I'm a complete introvert. I hate dealing with people. A big part of law enforcement, especially patrol or any aspect of law enforcement, is eventually dealing with people, and also ultimately dealing with people having a bad day or them having a bad day because you're there. So that's going to be a really difficult one to explain too, if you kind of mark that way. So I'm not telling you to lie on your psychological exam. I'm just telling you to understand the profession. So if you're more of an introvert and you don't like going out and partying, articulate that. Like, no, I still like discussing things with people and I still like talking with people. I'm just not a party animal. I don't like going out to a club. I don't like going out to a dance hall or whatever it is that you all do these days. But clearly articulate that. You don't have to sit there and elaborate, but you do have to clearly articulate it and be specific in what you're trying to explain, so that it doesn't leave room for the psychologist to guess as to what your answer is. So that's one aspect, right? If they're getting rid of certain aspects, I've seen law enforcement agencies now are removing PT tests, right? They're removing the initial PT test to get the system going, and you're able to do a written test online now, right? That's another thing that's changing. We'll come back to that. But they're getting rid of the PT test. So you say, hey, I'm gonna get hired on and I'm going to not have to take a PT test. Well, they're getting rid of the initial hire PT test, but they have to pass the PT test in the academy. Otherwise, they don't stay in law enforcement. What some departments have decided is if we give them that amount of time and say, hey, we're going to hire you, you have the academy and you have to pass the academy, they have more time to train, and the academy helps train them to pass the PT test. So then they're more inclined to be able to pass it because they're prepared. Or they're saying you have to pass the PT test here in the academy, and then you have to pass the PT test quarterly during your probationary year in order to stay employed. And what this is doing, it's prolonging a better fitness candidate, right? The candidate is getting properly trained in fitness in the academy. They pass it at the end. They maintain that fitness at least for a minimum of the year, and they're building a good system that hopefully they'll keep and going throughout their career as they continue to progress to promote a positive fitness image for law enforcement, because law enforcement ultimately can be a physically demanding position and job. Now, just because someone's waiving the fitness test temporarily doesn't mean they're always going to waive it, or just because they're removing it from the hiring process doesn't mean that you're not going to have to do a PT test. The last thing you want to do is get hired on by an agency, go through 6 months to a year of the hiring process, get into the academy, and then lose your job. And then you have to explain to the next police department, even if you do become physically fit and meet the physical standards, you're going to have to explain to the next police department why it is that you got kicked out of the police academy or you failed the police academy, all because you couldn't meet the fitness standards. So as things are changing, don't think that it's getting easier is what I'm saying. Is ultimately they're trying to restructure the hiring process. Not every department, but some departments are really out there trying to restructure the hiring process to maximize their applicants that they are getting. And as I said before, it's not that they're not getting enough applicants. They may not be getting as many applicants as they had in the past. And that's slowly changing too, because law enforcement has now increased their pay rates. So, and the benefits are always well, and they've always met the standard or been above the standard, because you're usually a government employee and they have very good benefits for you and your family. But now the pay's increased. So applicants are starting to roll back into law enforcement, especially because they're seeing it's a good time. Now you are at the pinnacle point to apply to become a law enforcement officer. Let me make that perfectly clear. You are at the best time right now. If you wait a year, it might not be as good. It's not going to be bad, but it may not be as good. But it's better to apply for 40 positions with 400 applicants opposed to 800 or 1,000 applicants, right? Because each other applicant that apply technically could be a more qualified applicant than you are. And that's not even discussing laterals. We're just discussing new hires right now. So as we're going through this, and as you're understanding what we're discussing, keep in mind it's all going to change. Right now, it's at a good position. Right now, you have a good shot at becoming a law enforcement officer, for the sheer fact that you don't have as much competition. Right? You don't have as much competition right now. Doesn't mean there's not competition. It just means that the competition that is coming in is usually a little bit of a higher caliber right now, because those are the ones that are saying, hey, I meet all the requirements that are coming through. And just because requirements are shifting, they're not going away, they're just shifting. If the polygraph isn't there, it's shifting to the psychological. If the fitness isn't there in the beginning, it's shifting to the academy, and then during the probationary phase. All these shifts are just restructuring so that they can find the most efficient way that works for their department. A lot of departments really like their current hiring process and they're sticking with it. Other departments have tried to outsource a lot. We're talking about the NTN test, National Testing Network. A lot of major departments like New York and California have kind of went to this type of system. Others still use civil service exam. Others have their own individual exams. But the shift here with the written exams, or the third-party written exams, is the fact that they're trying to make it more efficient so that they're not spending as much time with individuals running the written exam. And with the NTN test, you sign up, you register for it. Maybe it's usually you apply to the department, They give you a code that allows you to sign up for the NTN test. You go to a local testing network. You can't do it at your house. You go to a local testing network where they are the ones that observe you. And it's just a third-party outsource that's going on right now. It is not that many departments across the nation are using something like that, and it doesn't allow them to get an initial introduction. You always want to get as much face time as possible. So I'm not a fan of the NTN test. Just that sheer fact is I don't get to observe the candidates as much. I don't get to start trying to isolate the positives that each candidate can bring. And I don't get to put a face to the name of each candidate, how quickly they got done the test, what their score was, and then ultimately decide when they're rolling over to the fitness test or vice versa. So with the NTN test or these third-party testing networks, you have to remember is while it is more convenient for you, you are losing that FaceTime capability. So if you're in Nevada and you want to go work in California and you do an NTN test over in Nevada while someone else is right next to the department, they might still do the NTN test locally, or they might do the NTN test at the department if the department hosts it. But they can always just go over to the department and get that FaceTime, whereas you may not have that option. All right, that leads me into the out-of-state aspect. The out-of-state aspect is changing greatly. Right now, law enforcement departments, once again, this isn't every law enforcement department, but they are categorizing individuals as local or like residents or non-residents. And non-residents are actually kind of starting to get deterred, or they're starting to deter non-residents from applying to their department. One, for the sheer fact of they're going to have to move, and it's a much longer process to get them out there. When I say longer process, I mean it's more work. And other aspects is individuals applying to certain states like New Hampshire, who doesn't have a polygraph test for their departments up there. They're not actually even accepting any non-residents applications at this time unless they've already exhausted all their resident applications. So they are categorizing residents first. They're giving them priority over non-residents. And you're seeing this with other states too. Florida, Texas, you're seeing a lot of them prioritizing the residents that are applying because, one, they can have that face-to-face, and then two, it's easier to do their background if they're local because you can run their background, see if there's been anything in there. They don't have to contact any other states to say, hey, I need the driving record for this individual, or I need to understand this individual's interaction with law enforcement. Usually they just have a collaboration with the departments in their state, and they just say, hey, so-and-so's applying. We see that they had an interaction with your law enforcement officers. Can you give me backgrounds on that interaction? It's just like, oh yeah, it was a simple traffic stop and it led to a verbal warning and the individual was dismissed. That's why residency is being prioritized over non-residents. So keep that in mind. If you're applying out of state, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, and I always highly recommend you looking into states where you want to go. But if you see yourself having a difficult time getting through that process, just know that being a non-resident is not necessarily helping you in that aspect as being the most highly qualified applicant. That's why you got to really stand out during your written and physical tests, because it puts you at the top of the list and they want to see you come out and go through the process. All right, we hit psychological, we hit the poly and the written tests being changed up a bit. So background is being tolerated less. And you're going to hear me discuss this tomorrow or on day 2 of the process with what I'm going to call hurdles. And we're going to play the 3-strike rule here when we get into that for day 2. But for right now, backgrounds are being increased significantly. The last thing a department is wanting to deal with is an individual who is having a bad reputation, right? An individual is having a bad reputation and bringing that to the department, which ultimately makes the department look bad. Individuals are recruiting law enforcement at record rates. Law enforcement are getting in trouble at record rates, and ultimately civil lawsuits have been filed also at record rates. Now, a lot of times law enforcement are within their authority and they're granted qualified immunity, but it's still a black eye for the department, and that's nothing that they want. Departments are trying to build their community right now, or trying to build their relationship with the community, I should say, more than ever, because that's what they need, and that's what's needed in the law enforcement community the most right now. So you coming in could be that bridge, right? You could come in and really help bridge the gap, and maybe that's what you and a few others that come in do, is you really orient that community involvement. But if they have an inclination that you're going to give them a black eye, something in your past that if it were to come up during a request for information, whether it's a FOIA or whether it's a state one, then it's not going to be a good look, because they're going to say, hey, you knew this and you still hired this individual. Now, as I said before, we're going to play the 3-strike rule on day 2 as to how many hurdles a department has to jump before they'll say, no, I'm just not going to do it, even if these aren't disqualifying factors. But keep that in mind. The background is definitely being looked at very closely these days. And if something pops up that is not a good character trait, then they're just saying, hey, we appreciate your application, but we're not moving forward with you at this time. All right. So the departments are mixing it up. They are being very, very different. You're not going to apply to one department where every process is the same anymore. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that's what you were going to see. The last 2 years, not so much. They're mixing up and saying, how do we come up with the best hiring process? Every department out there is trying to be the best. They're trying to be the most efficient, trying to, one, save money, but get higher quality applicants, which sometimes is very hard to do. And they want to know that the applicants that they are going to hire are going to be around and they're going to have good retention and good recruiting throughout the whole process. So day 2, we'll go over the hurdles that are being seen these days, and the ones that are leading to 3 strikes, and the ones that are just being completely saying, hey, we know that you were never charged with this, but because you have something in your background, we're not touching it. Remember, down below are those 2 free gifts. One is the Getting Started as a Police Officer. It's going to walk you through the hiring process and see where you fall on our police exam, our written exam down there. See what your score is. You can take the test, and it's going to generate your score as soon as you're done, and see how you score. Also, if you have something more specific to you, I'm here. I'm available. You can reach out. That free coaching call is down below. I hope it helps. And as always, stay safe. I'll see you soon.